It's now been about 22 hours since Jon Jones became stuck in that hole inside the cave. Just recently, they've been trying to figure out a way to have him communicate with his family by radio.
Many people around the world choose to engage in dangerous real-life stunts by exploring challenging parts of the Earth. Some achieve unique feats, while others encounter devastating disasters. One such incident is the Nutty Putty Cave. The Jones family decided to go caving at Nutty Putty Cave during their holiday, unaware of the danger that awaited them, which would lead to a devastating loss. This is the infamous Nutty Putty incident. On November 24, 2009, Jon Jones, along with his family and friends, chose to explore Nutty Putty Cave as a way to bond during the Thanksgiving holiday. Although Jon had ample caving experience from his childhood, having been taken on numerous caving trips by his father all over Utah, he had not been caving recently. Currently married and had a child, Jon was a medical student at the University of Virginia. Nutty Putty Cave was first explored in 1960, and it quickly became famous and is still considered a beginner's cave by many for its narrow and slippery passageways, twists, turns and squeezes. Different parts of the cave are named accordingly: the birth canal, the aorta crawl, the scout eater, and the maze. Nutty Putty Cave is a hydrothermal cave with a total surveyed length and depth of 1355 and 145 feet, respectively. It was 8 p.m. on Wednesday when Jon's family had finally entered the Nutty Putty Cave. His pregnant wife, Emily, stayed back at the house with their one-year-old daughter, Lizzie, to enjoy a more relaxing evening. Everything went smooth for an hour or so. The family had explored the largest room in the cave, aptly named the Big Slide. Soon, Jon, Josh, and two of their friends decided to take up a challenge they had heard about, namely passing through the birth canal, a narrow and challenging passageway that eventually opens up into a larger room. Jon went first. He wriggled forward for some time, but did not see any larger area. He continued to inch forward, but the narrow passage did not come to an end. Instead, the squeeze made a sharp downward turn. Confidently, Jon pressed forward, perhaps noticing the tunnel got wider at the bottom, but it was already too late. 5 years before, a 16-year-old boy named Brock Clark was stuck in this corkscrew section. He was only 5'7" in tall and weighed 140 lb, but got wedged when he was trying to turn around. It took 14 hours for rescuers to free him. Jon was in the exact spot where Brock got stuck trying to turn around. Since Jon was 6 feet tall and 200 lb, he clearly knew that turning around in this part of the tunnel was not an option for him. It all went wrong 50 feet earlier. In any case, Jon kept pushing through until he couldn't continue. To top things off, he had wriggled into a fissure that went nearly straight down, which made him unable to turn back on his own. The narrow crevice he was trapped in measured 10 by 18 inches. This size is comparable to the opening of a front-loading washing machine, except it wasn't a perfect circle, and he was stuck in the tightest part of the opening. Trapped more than 100 feet below the ground and deep inside the cave, all Jon could do was wait and pray. His brother Josh, who was following him, was the first one to find Jon. Anxious about how much the rock had swallowed Jon, Josh tried to pull him out, but only managed to inch him up a little. As soon as he let Jon go, he slid right back into the crevice. Jon was stuck, with one hand pinned underneath him and the other forced backward. His ankles and feet were free, but were of little use as gravity pushed him down. They both said a quick prayer, and Josh hurried back to the ground as fast as he could, slowly wiggling out of the tight passage and rushing to the surface. Once outside, he quickly called for help, while their friend stayed with Jon. The first person to arrive to help, Susan, was a local rescue volunteer who arrived sometime around midnight. It was now more than 3 hours since Jon had been trapped deep inside the cave, but she couldn't do anything. Within hours, dozens of rescuers arrived, quickly devising multiple plans. They considered various options, including lubricating the cave walls. Ultimately, they decided to use a rescue rope threaded through climbing cams, with one end tied around Jon's legs and the other pulled by the team. Simultaneously, they attempted to drill away rock near Jon, but the hard material and his awkward position made progress painfully slow. In over an hour, they managed to drill just a few inches. The position of Jon's body also complicated things. He was trapped nearly upside down. Only his feet were visible to the rescuers, and the ceiling above the feet hanged so low, the rescuers couldn't just pull him out, as his feet would get in the way. Time passed as rescuers worked frantically and failed with their first system of climbing cams. They then tried to use a rope pulley system, anchoring the pulleys with bolts, drilling the bolts deep in the cave walls. Everything was made more difficult by how narrow the cave was. Even though there was a large team of rescuers, volunteers, emergency services, and a rescue helicopter outside, only one person could directly access Jon. Meanwhile, Jon was doing worse. Jon had now been trapped upside down for 19 hours, having some difficulty breathing, and his heart had to work twice as hard against gravity to push the continuous blood flow out of his brain. He was swinging back and forth between panic and calmness. Everything changed when the rescuers finally finished installing their pulley system and started pulling Jon out. They worked in an 8-man tandem, all tugging as one. Jon was at times in great pain, so they made frequent pauses. But each time they pulled, they managed to pull Jon up a bit more. After pulling him upwards the third time, Jon was finally lifted high enough so that he could make eye contact with the rescuer closest to him. He looked tired, his eyes were red, and his face was dirty, but he seemed fine otherwise. When the rescue team pulled Jon upward for the 4th time, something happened. The entire team fell backward as the rope suddenly went loose in their hands. The closest rescuer felt something hard hit his face, and he passed out for a second. When he came to, he saw nothing but dust. Once the dust settled a bit, he realized the stone arch near Jon's legs, where the rope was tied around, had shattered, and the nearest key bolt had broken off. He couldn't make out in the dust where exactly Jon was, but soon he realized Jon had slid right down the crevice again, this time seemingly even deeper than before. As the rescuer suffered severe facial injuries from the impact with a metal carabiner and couldn't continue his rescue efforts, he had to switch places with his dad, who was also on the rescue team. When he reached Jon, he realized that Jon's breathing was much more shallow and less frequent, and he was struggling to stay alive. The rescuer called for Jon, but received no response. Desperate, he tried to lower himself into the crevice to put the rope around Jon's waist, but got stuck himself. After finally wriggling himself free, he drilled a new hole for the pulley and crawled out of the cave, exhausted, to be replaced by yet another rescuer who reached Jon but couldn't make contact with him. At some point, the rescue team decided to bend his knees to the side. They were strongly considering breaking his legs to get him back into the passage because time was running out for Jon.
Shauna, he was pulled back a little bit to a more comfortable position where he was in more of a horizontal position, but there was still 16 feet of that tight tunnel he was stuck in for him to get out of before he would be truly freed and be able to leave the cave. Now, a piece of equipment broke at that time. He has since slid back into that original position with his head down at a 60 or 70 degree angle, so a very uncomfortable spot, and rescuers very worried tonight.
Soon after, a medical professional crawled into the cave and reached Jon. At 11:56 on Wednesday, November 25th, Jon Jones was pronounced dead. The rescue teams worked for 24 hours straight to try to free Jon, but it was just not possible with his upside-down position. Jon survived an extraordinary 27 hours in an inverted position, which is 3 times longer than what was predicted as possible. He was 26 years old. A total of 137 rescuers worked hard for 27 hours to save Jon, but had to leave the tragic site with empty hands and heavy hearts. The next day, the authorities determined that it was too difficult and dangerous to get his body out of the cave, so Nutty Putty Cave will forever remain the final resting place for Jon Edwards Jones. A week later, public authorities decided to close Nutty Putty Cave to the public permanently. It has been sealed ever since. Jon was left to rest in the Ed's Push section of the Nutty Putty Cave for eternity. The entire cave system was closed off with concrete never to be explored again. A plaque was placed there to commemorate the life of Jon Jones.